The unexpected arrival of the mining vessel, Horizon's Edge, drifted through the outer rim of what humans called the Kepler 442 system. Its crew of 32 colonists, completely unaware they had crossed into the most dangerous region of known space. Commander Marcus Webb stood at the observation window, watching the strange purple nebula that hadn't appeared on any of their star charts. Behind him, his navigation officer, Lieutenant Sophia Reyes, frowned at her console as readings flickered. Between impossible numbers, the Korathian Empire had ruled this sector for 3,000 years. Their scouts detected the human vessel within minutes of its arrival, and Fleet Marshal Zithik received the report with his usual efficiency. Another species had wandered into their territory. It would be conquered or destroyed within the standard cycle. He ordered Battle Group 7 to intercept 500 warships that had never failed to terrify their targets into immediate surrender. When the Korathian fleet materialized around the small human vessel, the display was calculated to inspire maximum psychological impact. Ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect synchronization, their hulls gleaming with weaponized plasma arrays that could vaporize planets. The smallest destroyer in their fleet was 10 times the size of the human mining vessel. Fleet Marshal Zithik personally opened communications, his reptilian features filling the screen as his translation. Matrix converted his growls into human language. Marcus Webb looked at the massive alien face on his screen, then glanced at Sophia, who shrugged. He straightened his worn mining uniform and responded with the same tone he might use when meeting new neighbors. The conversation that followed would become legendary throughout the galaxy, though neither side understood its significance at the time. The Fleet Marshal announced his titles and the power of his empire, listing conquered worlds and subjugated species. He described the fate that awaited those who resisted Korathian rule. He expected fear, panic, or at least concern. Instead, Marcus asked if the Korathians had any updated star charts for this region, as they seemed to have gotten lost during a navigation malfunction. Sophia added that they were running low on coffee and wondered if the aliens might have something similar they could trade in the command center of his flagship. Zithik's secondary brain struggled to process this response. His tactical officers exchanged confused glances through their 4 eyes. The psychological warfare specialist, a being whose entire career focused on reading enemy responses, simply threw up all 6 of his arms in bewilderment. The humans continued their side of the conversation as if meeting an alien armada was a minor inconvenience during their work shift. Dr. James Park, the ship's geologist, asked about mineral compositions in nearby systems. Engineer Maya Patel wanted to know about their hyperdrive technology, mentioning that Earth scientists would find it fascinating. Biologist Tom Anderson cheerfully inquired whether the Korathians had encountered any other carbon-based life forms. In their travels, each question struck the aliens like a physical blow. No species had ever responded to their arrival with academic curiosity. The weapons officer suggested they fire a warning shot to establish dominance, but Zithik hesitated. Something was wrong here. These humans showed no stress indicators that their sensors could detect. Their heart rates remained steady, their voices calm, their body language relaxed. The translation specialist pulled Zithik aside and whispered urgently. Their computers had been analyzing human biological data, and the results were disturbing. Not only were the humans not afraid, but several appeared to be excited. One was taking notes. Another was sketching the Korathian ships on a digital pad. The youngest crew member was trying to figure out how to take a selfie with the alien fleet in the background. Zithik made a decision that would haunt him. He ordered the humans to follow his fleet to the imperial capital. They would let the Emperor himself deal with these bizarre creatures. As the massive armada began moving through hyperspace, the small human ship followed obediently, its crew discussing among themselves how fortunate they were to make first contact with an advanced civilization. Journey took 3 days. During that time, the humans repeatedly requested cultural exchange information. They asked about Korathian art, music, and history. Sophia started learning their language using intercepted communications. Marcus organized his crew to prepare presentations about Earth, apparently planning to give lectures about human culture. Maya disassembled and reassembled their mining equipment to pass the time, inadvertently creating modifications that improved efficiency by 30%. Korathian crews watched all this through surveillance systems, growing more unsettled with each passing hour. Conquered species always spent these journeys in despair or plotting desperate escape attempts. The humans were treating it like a business trip. They maintained their ship, exercised on schedule, and held movie nights where they watched old Earth films about alien encounters, laughing at the inaccuracies. Word spread through the fleet about the strange new species. Junior officers whispered theories in the mess halls. Perhaps the humans were robots, incapable of fear. Maybe they were scouts for an even more powerful civilization. Some suggested they possessed psychic powers that made them immune to intimidation. The truth was far simpler and far more disturbing. Humans just didn't see the situation as particularly threatening. On the second day, an incident occurred that would become infamous in Korathian military history. A technical malfunction caused one of their destroyers to drift toward the human ship. Standard protocol would be for the smaller vessel to take evasive action immediately. Instead, Maya hailed them and offered assistance, correctly diagnosing the problem from external observation and suggesting a solution that their engineers hadn't considered. The destroyer's captain, a veteran of 50 campaigns, later reported that the humans' helpful technical support was the most disturbing enemy encounter of his entire career. They had fixed a classified military system they had never seen before, explained the repair with cheerful efficiency, and then asked if the Korathians had any interesting engineering problems they'd like help solving. By the time the fleet approached, the capital world, paranoia had infected every ship. Officers were making formal requests to increase weapon readiness. Security teams doubled their patrols. The fleet's morale officer, whose job was to maintain military confidence, requested immediate leave for psychological treatment. Zithik found himself studying every piece of information about the humans, searching for the source of their impossible confidence. Their ship had no weapons worth mentioning. Their technology was centuries behind Korathian standards. They had no allies in this part of space, no reinforcements coming, no escape route planned. Yet they acted like invited guests rather than prisoners. The breaking point came when Marcus sent a formal message thanking Zithik for the escort to the capital. He mentioned that his crew had prepared a presentation about Earth's history and culture that they'd be happy to share with Korathian scientists. He also asked if there were any local customs they should be aware of to avoid inadvertent offense during their visit. The fleet marshal stared at the message for a full hour. In 3,000 years of conquest, no one had ever thanked him for bringing them to their doom. He began to suspect that these humans knew something the Korathians didn't. Their calm wasn't ignorance, it was confidence. But confidence in what? As the capital world came into view, with its massive defense platforms and planetary shields that had never been breached, Zithik made a decision. He would not report the humans as typical conquered species. He would classify them as an unknown anomaly requiring special investigation. It was the first time in Korathian history that such a classification had been used. The human ship descended toward the capital, its crew pressing against the windows to admire the alien architecture. Sophia was recording everything for scientific analysis. James collected atmospheric readings. Tom excitedly pointed out the differences in plant evolution visible from orbit. Marcus was already planning his presentation for whoever governed this impressive civilization. None of them realized that their simple curiosity and professional calm had already begun to crack the foundations of an empire built on fear. Korathians had conquered through intimidation for millennia. They had never encountered a species that simply didn't recognize intimidation as a valid form of communication. As the Horizon's Edge landed at the Imperial spaceport, surrounded by enough firepower to destroy a small moon, Maya looked up from her engineering console and made an observation that would echo through Korathian military academies for generations. Their docking clamps use a really inefficient magnetic field distribution. I bet we could improve their fuel efficiency by at least 20% with a few simple modifications. The guards assigned to escort the humans to the Imperial Palace would later report that this was the moment they began to fear the strange. Aliens from Earth, not because of any threat or show of force, but because the humans looked at the most advanced technology in the known galaxy and immediately thought of ways to improve it. The ripple effect the Imperial Palace of Korath stood as a monument to 3 millennia of conquest, its obsidian spires reaching into the purple sky like claws grasping at the stars. Every surface was designed to diminish visitors from the 100-foot-tall entrance doors to the corridor walls lined with preserved remains of species that had resisted the Empire. As the human delegation walked through these halls, their escort of 50 elite guards expected the usual reactions of horror and submission. Instead, Dr. James Park pulled out his scanner and began taking mineral readings of the walls. The obsidian wasn't natural, he noted to Sophia, but a synthetic composite that was actually quite brittle despite its intimidating appearance. Maya was examining the preserved specimens with professional interest, commenting on the various evolutionary adaptations. Tom Anderson stopped to admire what the Korathians considered their most terrifying trophy, the skull of a Verdanian war beast, and cheerfully asked if they had any live specimens he could study. Guard Captain Krex, veteran of 100 subjugation campaigns, felt his scales shift uncomfortably. He had escorted dozens of species through these halls, watching them crumble beneath the psychological weight of the Empire's power. These humans were taking photos and discussing the architectural choices like students on a field trip. The throne room was the Empire's masterpiece of intimidation, a vast chamber where darkness seemed to have physical weight, filled with floating platforms that forced visitors to walk single file over seemingly bottomless voids. The Emperor's throne sat at the far end, raised 50 feet above the floor, forcing all who approached to crane their necks upward in submission. Holographic projections showed worlds burning, fleets destroyed, civilizations kneeling in defeat. Emperor Vox Har had ruled for 500 years. He had personally overseen the conquest of 17 species, and had never once failed to break a delegation's spirit within the first minute of meeting. When the humans entered his throne room, he began his practiced ritual of dominance. His voice enhanced by acoustic amplifiers that made it resonate in visitors' chest cavities. Marcus Webb and his team walked across the floating platforms with the same casual confidence they'd show boarding a subway train. When the Emperor began his threatening monologue, listing the worlds he'd conquered and the species he'd eliminated, Sophia politely waited for him to finish before asking if they had real-time translation devices available as she was working on a comparative linguistics paper and would love to study their language matrix. The silence that followed was absolute. The Emperor's personal guard shifted nervously. The court officials, arranged in intimidating formations around the room, began whispering among themselves. No one had ever responded to the Emperor's death threats with a request for academic collaboration. Marcus stepped forward, somehow making his worn mining uniform look dignified. He introduced his crew with the same professionalism he'd use at a corporate meeting. Each human gave a small wave when introduced. Maya actually smiled and mentioned she'd love to examine the throne's hover technology. Tom asked if the Empire had any xenobiology departments they could visit, Emperor Voxar found himself in an impossible position. Every protocol, every tradition, every instinct demanded he order these aliens destroyed immediately. But something in their complete lack of concern made him hesitate. His tactical advisors had sent him reports during the journey. These humans had casually solved technical problems that had stumped Carathian engineers. They had identified weaknesses in fleet formations within minutes of observation. The Emperor decided to escalate. He ordered a full military demonstration, something reserved for only the most defiant species. The ceiling of the throne room became transparent, revealing the sky above filled with thousands of warships. Ground forces marched into the chamber in perfect synchronization. Weapon systems powered up with ominous hums that vibrated through the floor. The humans watched with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. Maya started calculating the power requirements for such a display. James wondered aloud about the economic cost of maintaining such a large standing military. Sophia began counting the different ship classifications visible above. Tom pulled out his datapad and started sketching the armor designs of the ground troops. Then Marcus did something that would be discussed in Carathian military academies for centuries. He applauded, not mockingly, but with sincere appreciation, as if he'd just watched a particularly impressive theater performance. The rest of the humans joined in, clapping politely while nodding their approval of the coordination and discipline on display that the psychological warfare division of the Empire would later mark this moment as the beginning of what they called the Great Confusion. The sound of applause echoing through a throne room designed for screams and pleas broke something fundamental in the Carathian worldview. General Vexler, the Empire's most decorated military commander, stepped forward to deliver the ultimatum. Submit or be destroyed. The humans would become slaves or corpses within the hour. It was the same choice given to every species, delivered with the same inevitable certainty. Marcus looked at his team, appeared to consider the options, then asked a question that shattered 3,000 years of military doctrine. What exactly would submission entail? Are we talking about a client-state relationship, full integration, or some kind of tributary system? And what are the tax rates? We'd need to see the paperwork before making any major political decisions. The Empire had threatened thousands of delegations. They had never had one ask for documentation. Sophia had it another impossible question. If they chose the destruction option, could they have a few hours to transmit their research back to Earth? First, it seemed a shame to waste all the valuable data they'd collected about Carathian civilization. Maya mentioned that she'd already figured out 3 ways to improve their weapon systems, and would be happy to share the information either way. Tom asked if, regardless of the outcome, someone could send his botanical samples back to Earth's universities. The court fell into chaos. Officials who had stood in the same positions for centuries began moving, clustering in groups to discuss this unprecedented situation. Guards looked to their commanders for orders that never came. The Emperor himself sat silent on his throne, his 4 arms gripped tightly on his armrests. The Empire's chief psychologist was summoned. After observing the humans for 20 minutes, he delivered his analysis. They weren't bluffing. They weren't using reverse psychology. And they weren't insane. They simply operated on completely different social assumptions. Where the Carathians saw threat displays, the humans saw theater. Where the Empire demonstrated power, the humans saw inefficiency. Where 3,000 years of tradition demanded fear, the humans offered constructive criticism. The situation deteriorated further when Maya asked if she could examine one of the guards' weapons. Not to steal or study for weaknesses, but because she noticed a power fluctuation that suggested a manufacturing defect. She was right. The weapon had a critical flaw that could cause it to explode under certain conditions. She fixed it in 30 seconds using a tool from her mining kit. Word of the helpful human. who repaired Imperial weapons spread through the palace within hours. Then came reports that Tom had helped the palace gardeners identify a pest that had been killing the emperors. Prize plants. James had shown the maintenance staff how to reduce energy consumption in the lighting systems by 15%. Sophia was in the library, teaching archivists a more efficient cataloging system. The humans weren't conquering the empire. They were helping it run more efficiently. Emperor Voxar called an emergency session of his war council. The highest ranking military officials in the galaxy gathered to discuss what to do about 32 human miners who were treating the imperial capital like a community improvement project. The discussion lasted 18 hours and reached no conclusion. Every suggested response was countered by the simple fact that the humans weren't actually doing anything hostile. They were aggressively helpful. The tipping point came when reports arrived from across the empire. The story of the fearless humans had spread faster than any military campaign. Conquered species who had lived in terror for generations began asking questions. If these humans could face the empire without fear, what did that mean? Subordinate worlds started submitting formal requests to meet with human representatives. Revolutionary groups that had been dormant for centuries began reconsidering their positions. The empire realized it faced a threat unlike any in its history. Not a military threat, not a technological threat, but something far more dangerous. An existential threat to the very concept of rule through fear. The humans hadn't fired a single shot, hadn't made a single threat, hadn't shown any hostile intent. They had simply refused to be afraid, and that refusal was spreading like a virus through the collective consciousness of the galaxy. In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, Emperor Voxar made an unprecedented decision. He would offer the humans a unique position, not as conquered subjects or as enemies, but as consultants. They would be free to travel the empire, study its systems, and offer suggestions for improvement. In exchange, they would publicly acknowledge the emperor's authority. Asterisk. Marcus Webb considered the offer for exactly 3 seconds before making a counterproposal that would reshape galactic politics forever. The humans would accept the consultant position, but only if the empire agreed to establish cultural exchange programs with all member species. They wanted to learn from everyone, not just the Carathians. The emperor, faced with the choice between accepting these terms or watching his empire crumble under the weight of its own confusion, agreed. The document signed that day would later be known as the Curiosity Accords, marking the beginning of the end of fear-based governance in the galaxy. As the humans left the palace to begin their new roles as imperial consultants, Guard Captain Krex overheard Maya explaining to Tom how they could probably improve the palace's defensive systems by 40% just by reorganizing the power grid. He shuddered, finally understanding the truth that would reshape the galaxy. The humans weren't fearless because they were strong. They were fearless because they were too busy being curious to bother with fear. The Carathian Empire would survive another 1,000 years, but it would never be the same. The age of conquest through intimidation was over, replaced by something far more powerful, conquest through collaborative improvement. And it had all started with 32 human miners who got lost and decided to ask for directions. Asterisk.